The Night They Ran. Stories of girls escaping forced marriages in the Dark Ages. They weren't just one. They were many. Girls who ran beneath the same dark sky, hoping to find something gentler than what the world had prepared for them. They, too, didn't speak to each other. Not really. Not across the villages, not across the hills. Their names were different, their faces, their songs, their prayers, but their stories, those were the same, as if passed from one hearth to another, stitched into the air like smoke, or the fabric of the wool they spun day after day. Girls born with soft hands and wild hearts. Some were daughters of blacksmiths, others of bakers, shepherds, or traveling men who never stayed long. A few belonged to the nobility, locked behind stone walls and towers too cold to dream in. But most came from dirt paths and straw roofs, where life began and ended without much noise. In the Dark Ages, girlhood was not a season. It was a preparation. From the moment they could walk straight and keep quiet, they were told to make themselves smaller, fold the corners of their voices, smile without teeth, obey. And by the time their bodies began to change, before they even knew what it meant, the whispers began. He'll make a good match. She's nearly a woman now. Better to wed young before someone else claims her. They weren't women. They were trades. Sometimes a goat came with them, sometimes silver, sometimes nothing at all. Just a nod between men and a girl, packed off to a stranger's home, a new bed, and a life she never chose. But not all of them stayed. Some ran, not many, not loudly, but enough. Enough to leave footprints in the frost, enough to keep stories alive in the places where elders warned children not to wander. It always began at night, when the fields were silent and the breath of the world slowed, when the stars blinked like old secrets and the wind carried no judgment. That's when they left. No shoes, no torch, just a cloak too thin and a name they would never speak again. They ran from stone houses and thatched roofs, from altars and bridal chambers, from silk veils and broken promises, from men old enough to be their fathers, from mothers who begged them to stay, from fathers who said nothing, who turned away. One girl, her name might have been Aelith, waited until the feast ended. She watched the fire die in the hall where her wedding had been planned. She had never met the man. He was at war, or drunk, or both. She slipped through a kitchen door and into the woods before dawn. Another girl, perhaps she was called Leofrin, stared out a castle window, past the iron bars. Her marriage was a treaty, her body a border. One evening, she climbed down the side of the tower using bedsheets tied into knots. She vanished into the cold before anyone could stop her. A third, Britha maybe, was promised to a man with 3 dead wives. She ran barefoot across snow, her breath turning to ice, heart pounding like a drum. When they found her hours later, she had climbed into a tree, shivering, whispering prayers she didn't remember learning. And there were more, too many to name. Girls who slept in caves for shelter, who followed rivers downstream, hoping they'd find towns where no one knew them, who changed their names and wore dirt like armor, who disguised themselves as boys to earn bread, who offered herbs to the sick in exchange for a night's safety. Girls who survived by becoming ghosts. They never spoke of home again, not aloud, because home was where they were sold, where no one asked them what they wanted, where obedience was valued more than joy. But in the wild, though the dark was colder, it was theirs. They slept under trees and wrapped themselves in old songs. They told stories to themselves, quiet, soothing, about a world that didn't ask them to kneel. They clutched trinkets, a ribbon, a comb, a scrap of their mother's shawl, and sometimes, just sometimes, they found each other. 2 strangers at a stream, a fire shared in silence, a name whispered before sleep. And though they would part ways by sunrise, something sacred passed between them, a knowing, a silent vow. You are not alone. There were those who didn't make it far. The cold was merciless. So were the men who came looking. Some girls were caught, dragged back, married against their screams. Some were punished publicly, to make examples. Some disappeared entirely, becoming little more than rumors and warnings. But others made it. Some joined convents where no man could touch them. Others became midwives, healers, herbalists, wise women hidden at the edge of society. A few found towns where no one asked questions, where they could start again with calloused hands and new names. And over time, their stories turned into shadows. The old ones would mutter, "Beware the woods at night. Too many girls lost in there." They meant it as a warning, but to some, it was a map, a promise that others had gone before, a signal that running was not the end, but the beginning. They were not weak. They were not witches. They were girls who chose a life of danger over a life of silence. they had. No swords, no armies, just courage thick as blood, and the will to say no in a world that only listened to yes. And even now, centuries later, you can feel them in the wind. When the night is still and the stars blink slow, their stories don't end with the chase. They begin with the running. Because every girl who ran carved a path where none had existed. And for the ones still trapped, still silenced, still waiting, they left behind something stronger than footsteps. They left behind a way out. They had no maps, no directions, no safe houses, no handbooks telling them what came after the running, but they kept going, because they had already left too much behind to turn around. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, and yet, somehow, they learned to survive. The girl who had climbed the tower, the one whose father sold her name in exchange for peace, wandered through the hills until her feet bled. She came upon a monastery where the sisters opened the gate just wide enough. She told them she was an orphan, and they believed her. Or maybe they knew the truth and chose silence over questions. In the gardens behind that stone wall, she learned how to grow things again. Not just herbs or vegetables, but a life of her own. One girl who had hidden in the forests for weeks learned the ways of animals. She mimicked the sounds of the owls and watched how foxes moved unseen. People called her a wildling, a creature of the trees. But to the hungry or sick who wandered too deep into the woods, she became something else, someone who shared berries and poultices and warmth. A myth, perhaps, but a kind one. There were others who found villages not so different from the ones they left, yet far enough to be safe. They worked as washerwomen, servants, cooks. They kept their heads low and their eyes down, but in the quiet, they built something better than fear. One learned to mend clothes and opened a small shop by the market. Another helped deliver babies and spoke gently to the girls in pain, whispering to them like an older sister. A third girl, who had once been promised to a man twice her age, became the keeper of stories, telling tales in exchange for bread. She made them laugh, made them cry, and sometimes made them believe in themselves again. They became more than girls who had run. They became women who had built, not grand kingdoms, not legacies written in books, but tiny sanctuaries, spaces where no one shouted, no one struck, and no one owned them. Yet even in freedom, they carried the past. At night, they would wake to phantom footsteps, the rustle of a bridal veil, a father's voice, a locked door. They'd touch their own hands to remind themselves, you are not there anymore. Some had daughters of their own. They taught them different things, that their worth did not depend on what they could give, that their voices mattered even if they shook, that love, if it came, should never arrive with fists or commands. They told no bedtime tales of princes. Instead, they whispered of strong girls and soft rebellions, of walking barefoot into the woods with nothing but courage and the stars, of nights cold enough to crack bone, and yet survived. Some never told their stories at all. They feared being labeled witches, runaways, ungrateful daughters, so they kept the truth locked beneath their ribs and wore calm like armor. But still, they lived differently, loved differently, chose differently, and in those choices, they shaped the future. Because each girl who ran opened a door that had never been opened before. And the world, though slow to change, began to notice. A mother would pause before agreeing to a suitor. A village healer might speak kindly to a frightened child. A convent would open its gates wider than before, and sometimes, when no one else was listening, one woman would find another and say, I left too, and that was enough. Enough to break the silence, enough to say, we were not mistakes, we were not broken, we were not wrong to run. There were still dangers, still men who hunted, still traditions too old and deep to vanish in a generation. But now there were stories, whispers, warnings, maps carved from memory and passed through, glances and songs. And though history rarely wrote their names, you can still feel them. In the way girls hold hands when they walk home late, in the way someone says no and means it, in the way a stranger offers help without asking questions. They live in the echoes of resistance. Not loud, not violent, but enduring. So, when you hear tales of girls who disappeared into the night, don't believe they were lost. They were searching for peace, for breath, for days without fear, for mornings that began with birdsong instead of commands, for a place where their laughter was not a threat, where they could sleep without guarding the door, and many of them found it. Not always easily, not always quickly, but they did. They stitched their survival into the fabric of history, quietly, patiently, like mending a hem in the dark. They taught us that rebellion does not always roar. Sometimes, it is a girl slipping through the door before dawn, her heart pounding, her face wet, her future unwritten, but hers. And now, you know the truth. They weren't just stories. They were real. And they ran not because they were afraid, but because they were brave enough to imagine something better.